Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Masks Off. I'm Kim,
And I'm Tia.
and it's just us today. We've been
It
having
is.
so
We've
many
had
guest
so much,
speakers.
exactly, so much fun with all the guests.
Yes, it has been fun. I'm really glad that we are doing guests as well. It does break it up, and then it's always nice when we come back and it's just you and I chatting. So,
Exactly. Yeah, we've got guests out a little ways, so we won't tell
yeah.
you who they are yet to our listeners. You're just gonna have to stay tuned because they've been some amazing conversations.
Amazing conversation. I have been learning so much, so I'm so excited.
Great.
But anyhow, let me begin with our quote as we normally do. So today's quote is make sure your worst enemy is not living between your ears. And that's by Laird Hamilton. So, oh my God, my worst enemy is definitely between my ears for sure and it has been a wild beast to tame at times.
Mhm.
And honestly, when it runs amok and my mind is going haywire, the monkey mind, whatever, is when I have my most suffering, is when I'm suffering most.
Right. And
Right. So
so,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I was
No,
just
you
going to say,
go.
we all struggle. There's always going to, right? There's that other quote too. Pain is inevitable. Struggle is inevitable, but the suffering is optional. And man, whew, that's a hard one. It's a hard one.
It is, and recognizing that we're creating our suffering, and then it comes back to all of our other stuff, 100% responsibility,
Yeah.
co-creation, on and on and on. It's really hard to recognize that we are making things often more challenging and more difficult within, because we have this own inner language, inner stories that we've created through our own experiences. They don't just come
Yeah.
out of nowhere, but until we become aware of those stories and aware of the focus on the external instead of the internal. And once we go internal and realize, wait a minute,
Yeah.
back to our other thing, it's just raining. It's not this, that, or the other. We create the suffering around the thunderstorm or the rain because we had plans to go outside, but it just is. But between our ears creates something that isn't necessarily accurate, because we all have our own perceptions of each and every experience.
Yeah. So how does it show, how has it shown up for you, or like what's your experience been with struggle versus suffering?
I would say, I mean, obviously, I've done a lot of work around this, so it doesn't, I've knock on wood, it hasn't grabbed
Knock,
hold
knock.
in a huge way. It comes in, but a lot of it is like, oh, I mean, I think my biggest common theme that shows up is, oh, here we go again. Here's another thing.
Mm,
So, but I don't get stuck there. It's like, oh, there's another thing to add on to my plate, or to navigate or support someone or do whatever. And I notice it. And if that thought between my brain or those two ears starts to take over, it's like, no, I'm not going to suffer. I'm just going to meet it. I'm going to go through my choices, accept, change, or leave.
yeah.
Then what? And then what? And then if the thought train takes over again and I start to create or increase my suffering, shifting from a struggle to a suffering, then I know it's like, when you find that magic pause to notice, then it's time to really step back and, is it true? Is it not? And go
Yeah.
deconstruct. And what's my responsibility? Because oftentimes that's another piece. I create the suffering because I take on another person's
Mm,
responsibility instead of,
yeah.
like, wait a minute, this is mine, that's yours. I don't need to take that on for you anymore. That's been a huge growth thing for me. That took a long time. Still
So
some.
is it's still, yeah, yeah, I know. Is it pretty quick though now where you can catch it quickly, or does it still like start to, the storyline, the story making, the struggle or the suffering, does that go on for a little while before you catch it, or do you notice pretty quickly when you're in that space?
It's a great question. I would say more often than not, I catch it quickly now.
Mm,
Um, but of course, life happens and
Yeah.
sometimes you get down there. But no, now it's much more, I don't want to say instant, but it's fairly quickly. And then there's times too where I notice it and I'm like, I just want to wallow a little bit. And so I
Mm,
choose to suffer or just to be in that space. Because I do think that, at least for me, and I've experienced that with other people, sometimes we do just need to have a pity party for an hour or whatever
yeah.
long it is, because that's part of the human condition, but not stay stuck there. But just be like, I just want to feel sorry for myself.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels good sometimes, right? You just need to do
Yes.
that.
Well, and I mean, and even just like, you know, you and I venting to each other,
Yeah.
you know, that's part of that process as well. But we're not, it's not attaching and letting it become more and create more suffering. It's just like, hey, I need to vent and get this out. So it doesn't stay stuck and it
Yeah.
doesn't create more suffering. So I think it's that discernment, maybe. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so as well. The venting piece. I can remember though that, there was a time where it may have looked and felt like I was venting
Mhm.
with a friend, with a really close friend, but I was really just keeping myself stuck.
Right.
I was
Totally.
really keeping myself stuck and perpetuating
Hmm.
because I knew that I could share with this friend or that person or that friend, and I would get the sympathy, or I would get the like, oh yeah, that is so bad. I get it. That's so hard. Oh, how do you deal with that? That kind of
Right. Like, oh,
stuff.
that person is terrible.
Yeah. Like, oh,
Right.
yeah, of course. So in that sense, and that was a while, a long
Yeah.
time ago. In that sense, I think I know I was just perpetuating the
Mhm.
suffering and keeping myself stuck there.
Right.
So
But that's that discernment, right? So
yes.
knowing like, okay, I'm venting, because that
Yeah.
can, like venting and all of a sudden like, wait a minute, now I'm perpetuating.
Yeah.
Okay, I can vent, and in the venting, I'm also taking responsibility. Versus before,
Exactly.
it's the venting and taking
And
no responsibility.
right.
Versus like, oh, this is what's happening. It's frustrating. It's that. And I co-created this. And what am I going to do next? So
Yeah.
there's that discernment aspect.
Well, that's true because even with you, like I, will sometimes just say, "Hey, I'm really got this issue or I'm struggling," and I'll, tell you whatever's going on, and then I'll say to you, "Okay, help me see my part in it. Like,
Yes,
what am I missing? Am I missing? Where's my blind spot?" Because
exactly.
I feel and I hear the story going on, and I'm just like wanting to make sure, like that's part of deconstructing, that's part of taking responsibility, but at the same time I'm also venting and sharing the situation with you.
And I think that, like you said, that's part of the deconstruction, part of understanding, because if we can't, that's the beauty of doing the work with others, because we can't see our blind spots, or we couldn't be stuck in the suffering cycle and can't get out because we can't see that little nugget that someone else
Yeah.
can see to help get us rewrite back on track. Noticing like, hey, remember,
Yeah, exactly.
this didn't just happen to you. Maybe something happened to you, but everything after that is part of your co-creation. So now what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Have you thought about, it's much harder to do that work individually with ourselves.
So and then there's also like from my experience, there's also a whole host of people who do suffer.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I'm not even sure if they know that they're suffering. And they'll even say things like, oh, I have a black cloud hanging over me. Like, okay, yeah, that black cloud is just over your head. It's over, you know what I mean? It's like, and that's why all these bad things happen to me.
Right.
Either it's that, like saying that, or are they even aware that how much they are suffering? Like I see people, in my life
Mm-hmm.
that are truly suffering. And it seems, I wonder if they know how much.
I don't think you know till you know.
So how
Maybe
does
there's a
one
glimpse.
know?
of knowing, well, I think that's all part of the awakening, right? When we
How do you even
realize,
have like the flicker of I feel like it's always kind of just been a part of me. Like I came into this lifetime as a seeker and just not feeling like I was just different. I wasn't always on the path. I definitely had all that conditioning and all that work to do, but
right,
there's just something in me. And I wonder if it's in each and every one of us or only some of us, because I see so many people that go an entire lifetime, like so much, so many extended family members
right,
went a whole lifetime of never becoming aware.
right.
Never, I don't think they were ever aware of their suffering.
Or if they were, they never could voice it and feel
Yeah.
safe enough to voice it, right?
So that's what I always wonder about that. I'm always curious
Well,
because
I
it's,
think it's probably both. I think there are a lot of people who don't even realize it. They're so stuck in victim mode, the black
yeah,
cloud. Um, and it's everything's happening to me rather than for me and my growth.
yeah,
Right? So there's already a perception switch there. And then there's people who see it but don't know how to change it. So then they just stay stuck in that suffering cycle because they don't know how to get out, or they don't have the support systems in place. I mean, we have to be realistic too in that awakening and diving into this. I mean, there is privilege there, right? Because if you're literally just putting food on the table is a struggle, or a roof over your head, I mean, you don't have space to do that.
I
Some do,
know.
and I don't want to generalize, but there is a privileged
I,
piece to spirituality,
yeah, I agree. So then
particularly in this
that
country,
particularly what?
in developed countries.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So let's even talk about what the people, the underdeveloped countries and those that are just in survival mode. And that's millions and millions and millions of people on this earth, right? That are probably just in survival mode and don't even have that luxury of walking this path. So then what? So then they just is there any space there for freedom, or are they just living a life of suffering then at that point?
Well, I almost, and I want to acknowledge, I'm not well versed in this, so I don't want to,
Yeah.
please know that I'm not
This
meaning
is all just
harm, right?
wondering. We're just
Yeah, I
wondering.
almost think, you hear, and again, these are wide views, and I haven't experienced them myself, so I can't actually speak to this from a firsthand experience. Is you hear of people who don't have electricity and plumbing, but they live in communities,
Mm,
more how we actually are supposed to live as human beings, right? In multi-generational, people help each other out. I don't think there is as much suffering in the way we as a Western country think of suffering.
mm,
Where I think there's more suffering in a country where there's haves and have nots, and there's systemic reasons why. I mean, the whole minimum wage conversation and all these things going on, where there's a clear delineation of, I mean, people going to space and people can't put food on their table.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Another rocket, what time of recording, was blasted off into space today for
Mm,
a certain billionaire.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah,
that's such a huge contrast. So if you literally are a family of four and you are working 3 jobs trying to make ends meet, and you witness someone who literally could solve your hunger problems, blowing it
yeah,
off in one trip to space, but everyone could be fed in this country. How could
yeah.
there's that privilege, like survival, literally surviving, like food, shelter. But there also could be such great joy too. I mean, we don't know.
I know.
So it could be suffering from a form based, but completely freedom in a formless.
So then this begs to ask the question, am I creating a story in my head? Am
Mm,
I creating a story that people who are just surviving and, not on the path of whatever, they're just surviving, that they're suffering somehow? Or even the family members that I talked about,
right.
like just because they aren't doing this work and it looks to me like they're suffering, does that mean that they are suffering?
But aren't you only suffering if you have the awareness that you're suffering?
That's what I'm wondering. That was the question I was at. Yeah.
Because like there, a certain person, like whoever you have in mind in your family,
Yep.
you can see the suffering and the recycling and going back and round and circling the drain.
Yep.
It's going to take me under, going to take me over, and not getting out, not plugging the drain, creating a still water.
Yep.
But if they're in the cycle and they don't know any different, and their nervous system, that is what's normal to their nervous system, do they have the awareness, the wider view to see that?
Yeah.
And if they can't take responsibility for their co-creation, it's all on the outside. So not realizing the suffering is also part of their experience without knowing it. Because right when we've been on this awakening path, we don't know what we don't know till we know. I mean, like, I never thought I wore the victim mask, for example.
Yeah, I know.
Ever. But people who I saw were being victims really bothered me. It's like, take responsibility, you can create, But meanwhile, I didn't even realize that mask was there. So why would suffering not be any different if we don't even see the cultural, because we are culturally conditioned to suffer.
So say more about that. Why is that? Like, that's a setup? Like it's supposed to be that, like, this is me with my deep, deep questions. Like, is this part of how life is meant to be? Are we supposed to have this?
My perception, right? Because again,
yeah, that's all we're talking about. Yeah.
I believe it's part of the matrix for the most part. Because and I'm talking specifically in the US, right?
Yeah.
Because what are we told? Be busy. More you have to complain about, that's a badge of honor. Oh, I have this, I have that, I got to do this, I got to do that. That actually is creating, in my mind, suffering, the busyness, the overcommitting, never saying no, having no boundaries, right? We say yes to everyone, no to ourselves, is creating suffering.
Yeah.
And it's a badge of honor. So there is a cultural conditioning factor of suffering because it keeps us disconnected from ourselves, which keeps us in the matrix. Because if we connect to ourselves, then we're going to rise up against what women's roles are, what kids' roles are, what teachers' roles are, what everyone's roles are. And if we are connected to ourselves, we realize there are no roles. And then the system that's set in place of hierarchy completely falls like a house of cards. So why wouldn't they want us to suffer? Meaning
right.
the powers that be.
So before the system and before all this modern times, then do you think that that there was suffering beforehand?
Well, obviously I wasn't there, but I mean,
Yeah.
like, as you learn about indigenous cultures more and more, right?
Yeah.
Because now we're learning more about indigenous cultures.
Yeah.
Because the history books have been opened up a little more and we have more access. Is, yes, was there struggle and suffering? Sure, there's really hard winters, lack of food, whatever, depending on the season. But there was the harmony of living with one as nature. Not just in this country, in other countries, right? So there's that there's the collectively working together as a community, not staying in one spot, moving, and obviously there's specifics to each individual indigenous culture, but I don't think it was the same. How could it be?
So it was different. It was a different kind of suffering, one that we don't necessarily have as much in modern times in that way. But they had the harmony, they had the nature, they had all of that, which we tend to lack more. So I don't know, maybe I guess I always ask myself this question all the time, like, is suffering, we said in that one quote that says pain is inevitable suffering is optional. So maybe it's the pain part then, because is it there to help us grow? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Again, because it's how you look at it.
And struggle, I mean, we're always going to have struggle.
Yeah, the struggle and the pain
Right.
is there to help you grow. So that makes sense, but you don't have to suffer. So even people who may have it really tough, like in an undeveloped country, third world country, if they're having to struggle to get food and water and all of those things, they may, because they're in community, they may be completely happy from within, and aligned from within. And therefore, yeah, each and every day it's a struggle because we have to do all this hard work to go get our food or get water or whatever. But there may be some type of peace, inner peace, so that the suffering is not there. And it goes back to our episode on I can't remember his name right now, the one that was on America's Got Talent, the one that was in jail for 37 years.
Right, the jail.
And he had not committed that crime. So that's a prime example of he did not, where it says, make sure your worst enemy is not living between your ears. He said he had freedom of the mind, but that there must have been a lot of pain and a lot of struggle in being in jail for 37 years for a crime you did not commit.
Right. Right.
So it is true.
And I think a lot of it really is an individual aspect too, because I think there's always, we all have our stories, no matter what we grow up in.
Yeah.
I mean, I would imagine, prehistoric times, maybe there were stories in the earlier cultures and the earlier indigenous peoples. Who knows? We don't
know. Yeah.
It just looked different because we have, obviously it's very different in the modern world, but yes, so for his experience, and I think really it comes down to struggles are the experience, suffering is the story we attach to an experience.
Yeah.
Or a belief system.
Well, and I can even just share one example, even for myself, with this Wild Fit challenge that I'm doing, right? It's a struggle because, as I was just telling you, it is definitely a struggle. I'm now have eliminated sugar, alcohol, greens. I mean, it's just really an elimination kind of food program.
Right.
And I've been having the withdrawal symptoms. It's definitely a struggle.
Yeah.
And at times when I make sure your worst enemy is not living between your ears, and we actually called it, I think I shared, we call it the food devil.
Right.
So when the food devil is really loud and roaring, saying to me, like, why do you want to do this? Like, this is too hard. You can't, I don't want to do this. You don't need to do this. Go ahead. Just go to Starbucks. Just go to Starbucks and get a tea and a bagel. You'll be all set. Right. So like there's the storyline that's going on that is causing and creating more of the suffering.
Right.
Because that's what's going on between my ears. That food devil between my ears in my mind is creating the suffering.
Right. Right. Exactly. And it's a great example too. It really is, because you are having real experiences, body experiences, everything.
Yeah.
And you can choose to bail and listen to the story.
Yeah.
From a reactionary point versus you can also go through the process and choose to stop from a different energy.
Right.
Or you can keep going. But if you're going to keep going and just complain and go through all that suffering, well, why at that point?
Exactly.
If you're stuck there, I mean,
yeah, then
exactly. Then you're into judgment and etc.
Oh, and then it spirals.
Exactly.
It totally spirals. And then, it's like, oh, what's wrong with me? I can't do this. I've noticed the comparison mask, the perfection mask, like even just through this example in my life, I'm watching all of the masks, like wanting to I'm comparing to others on Facebook that are saying, oh, I've had absolutely no symptoms. I feel great. I have so much energy. And it's like, oh, it's no big deal. And I'm cooking this and I'm cooking that. And I'm like, oh my God, what is wrong with me? I can't do this. There's something wrong with me. Oh, it's so bad. So,
But then you get yourself out of it, right?
yeah, like, so I have, and I've been surprised. I still have that, like, hearing the voices, but I haven't caved. So I haven't given in to all of that. I
Wow.
hear it, but I have not. And I'm not sure if it's how the program is set up that I haven't. But yeah. So
wow. It's a great example.
Yeah. And I'm taking it as a really good opportunity to learn, right? Because that's what we do when you just can learn from all of this. So I'm learning, I'm watching my masks, I'm watching all of that and just learning from the experience.
Wow.
So anyway, but so that is what we wanted to say on struggle versus suffering, and just really how we do have a big part in making a difference, and how, and the freedom that we have.
Yes.
The peace that we have, whether we, stay in the suffering or not.
Exactly. And it takes time, like everything. I mean, we say that all the time, but it does. It takes time.
Yep. Exactly. It does. So whew. I know this was good. Well, thank you everyone for listening. And if you haven't had an opportunity to check out our Instagram page, you can find us on Instagram. And if you are watching us on YouTube, you can subscribe. And even if you're listening on a podcast, still the same. We appreciate the support.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Bye.